They didn't just deny him a withdrawal. They tried to erase his worth with a clipboard and a cold stare. But what they didn't know was that the black man in khakis wasn't just any customer. He was the architect of their careers, the name etched into the building's foundation. This isn't the story of a bank error. It's the story of what happens when a silent king is mistaken for a servant in his own castle. When his true identity is revealed, he'll show them who really holds the power here. Leave a comment below to let us know where you are watching from, and if you like fascinating stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Because tomorrow we have another incredible story, and there are many surprises waiting for you in the next parts. Marcus Bennett stepped through the glass doors of Bennett Financial at exactly 9:00 a.m. Not with swagger, not with a crowd, but with the quiet certainty of a man who had built something from nothing. The sunlight spilled behind him like a spotlight, catching the polished tile floors that reflected the weight of the legacy he never boasted about. He wasn't here in a suit. He wasn't flanked by assistants or escorted to a conference room. He wore khakis, a light blue button-down, clean sneakers, and calm intent. He looked like any man in line. And that was the point. He didn't come to be seen. He came to withdraw $15,000, 0 cents, from his personal account, something dozens of other customers did every week without issue. But Marcus wasn't interested in just the transaction. He was there to observe, to make sure his institution, the one he built brick by brick, was living up to its values. What he didn't expect was to be greeted like a stranger in his own house, because as he stepped closer to the teller counter, what met him wasn't professionalism, it was indifference, sharp and clinical. Amy Carter didn't smile, didn't look him in the eye. She slid the clipboard toward him without a word, like she was passing a ticket to a man who had no right to be there. Marcus filled out the form without hesitation, slid it back with his ID, and waited. She glanced at the slip, saw the amount, and shoved it back. "We can't process this," she said, arms folded, tone flat. He watched her, measured her words like weights on a scale. Just moments earlier, he'd seen a white man in a gray blazer walk out with perhaps $20,000, 0 cents in cash. No clipboard, no questions. But now, the policy had changed, not because of the number, because of him. Victoria Sanders stepped out of the back like a verdict, wearing heels. Her smile was all polished charm and no conviction. She delivered corporate phrases like a surgeon using a dull scalpel, calculated, cold, and precise. She mentioned security protocols. She needed verification. But Marcus knew what was really being verified had nothing to do with numbers. It was skin deep, and when she gave the signal and the security guard approached like judgment in uniform, Marcus didn't raise his voice. He pulled out his phone, pressed record, and let the silence do what it does best: expose everything. They didn't remove him from the premises. They erased him from their comfort zone. Ethan Reynolds didn't shout, didn't threaten, didn't explain. He just grabbed Marcus by the arm with a grip made of centuries, not seconds. It was the kind of force people call protocol when they don't want to say prejudice out loud. Marcus didn't resist. He wasn't the one creating the scene. He was the one the scene had been written for. As his body was nudged, then shoved, then forced backward, each step became a sentence in a silent verdict, not because he broke a rule, but because he broke their image of who should belong. The room didn't speak. No customer stepped forward, no teller raised concern, and yet the judgment hung heavy, like humidity in a storm that hadn't yet touched the ground. The bank floor, the very place where he'd once signed million-dollar wire transfers and green-lit expansion loans, was now reduced to a stage where a black man in khakis became a threat without movement, a disruption without noise. His back hit the glass door with a dull thud. The slap never came, but the insult already had. When Ethan tossed Marcus's ID on the pavement, it didn't just fall. It landed like a gavel, a declaration. Not of guilt, but of how easily someone's identity could be stripped down to stereotype. And then came the shift. A shadow stepped forward, not with force, not with apology, but with reverence. Jamal Brooks, the second guard, moved like a man who had carried too many unspoken truths in his chest. He crouched down, picked up Marcus's ID with slow hands, brushed off the dust like it was something sacred. He didn't speak for the cameras. He didn't grandstand. He just held the plastic card out, steady and proud, returning it like it was a medal earned, not granted. They gave him a badge, but not a voice. But in that moment, the act of handing back a name, the right to be seen, was louder than any outcry. "You good?" Jamal asked, barely above a whisper. Marcus nodded once. He didn't need comfort, he needed clarity. Jamal glanced toward the doors, where Ethan stood like a statue built of smug silence, then back at Marcus. "This place," he muttered, "does this all the time. Not to them, just to us." The words weren't angry, they were tired, worn down like shoe soles scraping pavement for decades. Doesn't matter how high you climb. They still see you on the first floor. Marcus didn't reply. He simply took the ID, felt the weight of it in his hand, and pulled out his phone. No fury, no volume, just 5 words. "I need you. Right now." The line didn't ring long. The voice on the other end didn't ask questions. It just inhaled sharply. "On my way." Marcus tucked the phone back into his pocket. The man they threw out was the check they never read. Now it was time to cash it. David Carter didn't walk into the bank. He audited the air. The moment the glass doors parted, the entire lobby stilled, like a courtroom waiting for the judge's verdict. Tall, composed, dressed in a tailored gray suit that whispered wealth and wielded precision, David's entrance didn't demand attention, it took it. Ethan stiffened near the door, suddenly remembering every headline he'd ignored and every meeting memo he'd probably skimmed. Amy's fingers froze on the keyboard, hovering like guilt that hadn't found a hiding place. Victoria's eyes, calculating as ever, met David's. But her smile didn't come as quickly this time, because even before he spoke, everyone could feel it. Something had shifted. David didn't scan the room. He locked on to Marcus, standing just inside the doorway. No words were exchanged, just a nod. One of recognition, one of authority. One of confirmation that whatever had happened here would not be forgotten, and it sure as hell wouldn't be tolerated. David stepped forward, each stride as even as it was indicting. Victoria started to speak, rehearsed professionalism curling on her tongue, but David lifted a hand without looking at her. A courtroom hush swept over the room. He turned to Amy first. "You refused his withdrawal?" She flinched at the directness, her voice catching. I was following protocol." David's gaze sliced through her. "Protocol is not your shield when your judgment is your weapon." Then came the reveal. Not in fireworks, not with a punch, but with a sentence that cracked the floor beneath them. "The man you dragged out," David said, slowly, deliberately, "is Marcus Bennett, the CEO of this institution, the man whose name is on your paycheck, the one who built this branch from dust and concrete." A collective intake of breath. Amy's hand dropped to her side like it had been slapped. Victoria went pale, lips parting, but no apology followed. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Marcus like he was seeing him for the first time, but too late. Too late to unsee the mistake. Too late to unmake the judgment. The room didn't erupt. There was no applause. There was only the silence of revelation, the kind that chokes more than it frees. David didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. This wasn't just poor service, he continued. This was discrimination wrapped in routine, prejudice disguised as policy. He looked at Victoria then, his voice calm but surgical. "Tell me, did you check his account before you called security?" Her lips moved, but her voice didn't. "Exactly," David said, the word like a gavel falling. Then came the cleanup, not with yelling, not with threats, but with swift, scalpel-like precision. David turned to Ethan. "You're on immediate leave, pending review." He turned to Amy. "Bias training, mandatory, effective now." And to Victoria, he didn't even offer a dismissal, just a sentence that cut deeper. "Clear your office, you're done here." He spoke like a surgeon, not to punish, but to remove infection. It wasn't about vengeance, it was about restoration. It was about what happens when true power, the kind that wears sneakers and humility, steps back into the place that tried to throw it out. Marcus never had to shout, he just had to stand. And when David stood beside him, the entire institution had no choice but to kneel to the truth. David turned to face the rest of the room, not just Amy, not just Victoria, but every teller pretending to look busy, every customer who had watched Marcus get dragged out like a threat instead of a man with a bank account. His voice wasn't loud, it didn't need to be. It was deliberate, sharp enough to cut through denial. "Before you questioned his funds, did you even check his account? Before you called security, did you ask yourself why you were so quick to believe he didn't belong?" Silence. The kind of silence that hums like guilt. "Protocol doesn't ask questions," David said, scanning each face. "But prejudice? Prejudice doesn't wait for answers. It writes its own." That sentence landed like a hammer dressed in a handshake. Amy's posture deflated. The confidence in her shoulders, the kind that came from years of knowing she'd be believed first, shrunk with every second she stood exposed. Victoria tried to hold her poise, but even the way she crossed her arms now felt defensive, not dignified. They had spent years perfecting their tone, sharpening their professionalism, and yet here they were, crumbling not from rage, but from receipts. "You built a wall out of policy," David said, "but you forgot that paper burns, especially when the truth lights the match." Their silence wasn't defiance. It was disbelief. Disbelief that their everyday behavior, so normalized it felt like breathing, had just been dragged into the light and named for what it really was. David didn't lecture. He dissected. "You didn't see a threat," he said. "You created one. Out of khakis, out of calmness, out of melanin." The discomfort in the room grew legs. Even the customers who once avoided eye contact were shifting now. The same people who had stood still when Marcus was shoved were now leaning forward, listening to the kind of truth they usually scroll past on their phones. "This isn't always loud," David continued. "It often wears a blazer, smiles politely, and calls itself protocol, but today it got caught, and tomorrow it gets retrained." Then he turned to Jamal, the only man in the building who'd shown dignity without needing authority. "What's your name?" David asked. "Jamal Brooks, sir." David nodded. "You're promoted. Effective immediately." Jamal blinked, unsure if he'd heard right. "We need more people who know how to return dignity, not just ID cards," David said. "And if the system trained you to see threat, then it's time we retrain the system to see humanity." Justice wasn't just a headline, it was a job title. And today, Jamal wore it like armor. No parade, no applause, just policy finally facing itself in the mirror. And not flinching. Mamie didn't say a word when Marcus returned to the counter. No forced apology, no eye contact, not even the stiff professionalism she'd used before. She just pulled her chair closer and began typing. Each keystroke echoed like a heartbeat in a silent room, mechanical and measured. The tension wasn't in what she said, it was in what she couldn't. The same woman who once pushed his ID aside now handled his withdrawal like she was defusing a bomb. She counted the money slowly, stack by stack, as if each bill came with a dose of shame. Marcus stood quietly, his presence no longer questioned, only respected by the room that had tried to erase it. She slid the stacks of crisp bills toward him. Her hands trembled ever so slightly, but Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't gloat, didn't lean into the silence to make her squirm. He just accepted what was his, What should have been his without debate. No small talk, no dramatics, just restoration. Amy had treated his withdrawal like a verdict. But Marcus? He treated it like breath. Necessary, unremarkable, and overdue. This wasn't a scene, it was a reset. Before leaving, Marcus turned to Jamal, who still stood off to the side, trying to make himself small even as his presence loomed with meaning. Without a word, Marcus pulled a few bills from his stack, held them out, and said, "Take the day off." Jamal blinked, stunned, like someone had just handed him dignity wrapped in cash. He took the money slowly, with the same reverence he'd shown earlier when returning Marcus's ID. It wasn't charity. It wasn't a thank you card. It was recognition between two men who understood exactly what silence could cost. And just like that, Marcus pivoted. He didn't pause for applause or approval. He walked toward the doors with the same steady calm he'd entered with, no longer mistaken for someone lesser. But before he left, he looked back at Victoria. Her eyes were hollow now, her polished facade crumbling behind the weight of her own decisions. Marcus said only 5 words, quiet, but sharper than any reprimand she'd ever received. "You should have checked my ID." No drama, no venom, just truth, wrapped in clarity. Then he left. And this time, no one stopped him. No one questioned him. They just watched. Because power, when it's earned, doesn't exit like a customer, it walks out like a standard. David didn't just end the situation at the branch. He sent a memo, short, blistering, and unambiguous, to every manager across every Bennett financial office. Subject line: "Zero tolerance isn't optional." It outlined immediate bias retraining, comprehensive internal audits, and a system for anonymous reporting of discrimination. No department was exempt. It wasn't about Marcus anymore. It was about the people who didn't have Marcus's title, who couldn't call a David Carter, who didn't have the luxury of being recognized. "This is for everyone who is never Marcus," the memo read. "Because if this can happen to a CEO, imagine what we've allowed to happen to the voiceless." In one page, David shifted the entire company's posture, from reactive PR to structural reform. And then the domino tipped. Someone in the bank lobby had filmed Marcus being dragged out. The clip was only 27 seconds long, silent, shaky, but devastating. It hit social media before the end of the day, captioned with a single phrase, "Check the ID." Within hours, thousands were sharing it. Not because they knew Marcus, but because they'd been Marcus. Black women talked about being told their accounts were flagged for security concerns. Latino fathers shared stories of being asked for 2 forms of ID while the white customer behind them was waved through. Asian professionals recounted asking for home loans, only to be told to bring a parent next time. The hashtag grew teeth, not as a protest, but as proof. One card had tipped the whole damn chain. Under the glare of public attention, the story evolved from scandal to conversation. Newscasters debated subtle discrimination. Editorials asked when professionalism became a code word for profiling. But the real change wasn't in headlines. It was in company break rooms, in policy review meetings, in the way managers started paying closer attention to who got the benefit of the doubt and who got the clipboard. Bennett Financial rolled out its first ever equity division. Marcus didn't chair it, that wasn't the point. It was led by a rotating board of frontline employees, tellers, assistants, junior analysts, the people who saw what happened before the cameras ever rolled. And as for Marcus, he didn't hold a press conference, didn't issue a statement. He returned to his office the next day like it was any other Thursday. No fanfare, no parade. But something had shifted. The receptionist stood up when he walked in. Not out of fear, out of understanding. One of the tellers left a note on his desk. "Thank you. You didn't just stand up for yourself, you stood up for all of us." He read it once, smiled softly, and tucked it into the corner of his drawer. Not as a souvenir, but as a reminder. That day, he hadn't withdrawn cash, he had withdrawn silence. In that, That was the real transaction. They thought they denied him a withdrawal. What they didn't realize is he came to test the foundation, and when it cracked, he didn't roar, he rebuilt it. Quietly, thoroughly, and with kindness that didn't ask for a thank you. Just accountability. Because sometimes the most righteous response isn't fury, it's a calm that makes injustice answer for itself. Leave a comment below to let us know where you are watching from. And if you like fascinating stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have another incredible story, and there are many surprises waiting for you in the next parts.